She had kept the secret for 6 years. 6 years of quiet shifts, careful hands, and a name that wasn't quite hers. The morning a battle-scared Belgian Malinois walked into room 14 of Calloway Veterans Medical Center and locked eyes with nurse Nora Voss, every wall she had built began to crack. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark. He sat down in front of her, lifted one paw, and held it there, a gesture so specific, so trained, that the Army Ranger lying in the hospital bed went completely still. Because that signal meant only one thing. She wasn't just a nurse. She never had been. Before we go any further, if you're the kind of person who stays until the end of a story, this one is for you. Follow along, hit like, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning shift at Calloway Veterans Medical Center started the same way it always did, with bad coffee, a handoff report that ran 10 minutes long, and the particular kind of exhaustion that settles into a person's bones after a 12-hour night. The hospital sat on the western edge of Duran, a mid-sized city that had grown up around a regional military installation and never quite forgotten it. The streets near the hospital still had the feel of a garrison town, practical, a little worn, full of people who kept their heads down and their expectations low. Nora Voss had chosen it on purpose. She arrived at 6:45 every morning, parked in the same spot in the staff garage, and walked through the side's entrance with a paper cup of gas station coffee, because the stuff in the break room tasted like dissolved cardboard. She was 34 years old, medium height, with light brown hair she kept pulled back, and eyes that were an unremarkable shade of gray, unless the light caught them at a certain angle. She didn't wear jewelry on shift. She didn't talk about her weekends. She worked nights when she could, and when she took day shifts, she was quiet enough that new hires sometimes forgot she was there. That was the point. The nurses who had worked alongside her for 2 or 3 years knew what she was good at: staying calm when patients coded, managing airways during trauma alerts, and handling family members who were falling apart without making them feel managed. The attending physicians trusted her instincts. The charge nurses gave her the hardest assignments without apology because she never complained and the work always got done. But none of them knew her. Not really. They knew the version of herself she had curated over 6 years of careful living, the woman who remembered birthdays on the unit, who covered extra shifts without being asked, who laughed at the right moments and disappeared at the end of every day without leaving a trace. She had become very good at existing without taking up too much space. The morning the convoy patients came in, she was 3 hours into a 12-hour day shift, working the trauma step-down unit on the 3rd floor. She heard the overhead alert before the charge nurse came to find her a mass casualty notification. 4 incoming from a vehicle accident on Route 9, all active military, all requiring immediate surgical consult. Calloway wasn't a trauma center in the traditional sense, but it had a contract with the regional installation and was equipped for exactly this kind of case. The surgical team was already assembling downstairs. Nora finished the medication check she was running, logged it, and went to help. She didn't rush. That was something people noticed about her during emergencies: the way she moved faster without appearing to hurry, the way her face settled into something flat and focused, while everyone around her was visibly stressed. A newer nurse named Paige once told her it was like watching someone switch off. Nora had smiled and said she just didn't have a good poker face for calm. Paige hadn't quite believed her but let it go. The first 3 patients came through in rapid sequence, 2 with extremity fractures, 1 with a serious abdominal injury that went straight to OR. Nora was assigned post-op observation for the abdominal case and spent the next 90 minutes in and out of the recovery suite. She was washing her hands at the hallway sink when the 4th patient arrived. She heard him before she saw him, not the patient, the dog. It was a single sharp sound, somewhere between a bark and a command, and it cut through the noise of the unit like a blade. Nora's hands went still under the running water. She didn't turn around immediately. She took a breath, dried her hands deliberately, and then looked. A Belgian Malinois was standing in the corridor, maybe 30 feet away, leash clipped to the belt of a man in a wheelchair chair being pushed by an orderly. The dog was scanning the hallway with the focused, methodical attention of an animal trained to read environments, not just react to them. He was a working dog, she could tell by the way he held himself, the muscle in his hindquarters, the way his ears moved independently of each other. Someone had put a vest on him, the kind that said "Do not pet" in bold letters, which the orderly was actively ignoring. The man in the wheelchair was watching the dog with the resigned patience of someone who had learned not to argue with an animal that outweighed most people's expectations. He had a bandaged left arm in a sling, a cut above his eyebrow that had been taped rather than sutured, and the kind of face that had probably been described as handsome before something heavy had hit it. Late 30s, maybe 40. He held himself straight, even seated, which told her military before she read the branch insignia on the dog's vest. Army. Ranger tab. She had already started walking toward the nurse's station to check the assignment board when the dog's head snapped toward her. She felt it before she registered it, a prickling alertness at the edge of her perception, the way the air in a room shifts when something in it changes. She looked back. The Malinois had stopped scanning the hallway. It was looking directly at her, not at the orderly, not at the man in the wheelchair, at her. Nora kept walking. The dog made a sound, not aggressive, not a warning growl, something else. A low, precise vocalization that she recognized from muscle memory more than conscious thought, the kind of sound a trained animal makes when it completes a targeting sequence and locks on. She did not look back again. She found the charge nurse, Gail Moretti, at the station and asked about assignments. Room 14's yours, Gail said, not looking up from the board. New admit, Ranger, arm fracture and soft tissue damage. He's got a service animal, which administration is already losing their minds about, so don't engage with that unless you have to. Understood, Nora said. She stood at the medication cart for a long moment after Gail walked away, reading nothing on the screen in front of her. Then she picked up the room 14 chart and went to do her job. His name was Captain Callahan. The file said 39, out of Fort Braden, currently attached to a unit whose full designation was redacted in a way that told her everything she needed to know about what they did. The arm fracture was a clean break of the radius, already set in the field, now waiting on the orthopedic consult to decide whether it needed hardware. The soft tissue damage was more complicated, a deep laceration along the left forearm that had been field dressed and had held, but would need proper wound care and monitoring for the next several days. She knocked twice and pushed the door open. The dog was in the corner. He'd been given more space than she expected. Someone had moved the guest chair, so he had a clear line to the door and to the bed. He was lying down with his head on his paws, ears forward, watching. The man in the bed had his eyes open, looking at the ceiling, left arm elevated on a foam wedge. He didn't look at her when she came in. "Morning," she said. "I'm Nora. I'll be your primary today." "Great," he said, with the tone of a man who had been in hospitals before and found them uniformly unimpressive. She moved to the vital signs panel, pulled the overnight numbers, started her assessment. Professional, methodical, quiet. The dog watched her from the corner. She was aware of it the way she was aware of weather, as an environmental factor, something to account for, without making it the center of her attention. She was checking the wound dressing on his arm when the dog stood up. She heard it, the shift of weight, the soft sound of paws on linoleum. Kept her focus on the wound site, on the edges of the field dressing, checking for bleeding or discharge. The dog crossed the room and sat directly beside her. Not between her and the patient, beside her, slightly behind her left shoulder, in the position a trained animal takes when it is flanking a handler. Callahan's eyes moved from the ceiling to the dog, then to her. She finished checking the dressing, noted the findings on the tablet, reached for the tape. "He doesn't do that," Callahan said. She said. "With people he doesn't know, he doesn't do that." She smoothed the tape edge with her thumbnail. "What's his name?" Pause. "Stryker. How long have you two been working together?" 4 years. He was still watching her, with the particular attention of a man whose instincts had kept him alive in places where most people would not survive. "He just sat down next to you." "He's probably tired," she said. "It's been a long morning for everyone." She stepped back to enter her notes and the dog followed her. 2 steps and then sat again. She entered the notes. She did not look at the dog. "What did you do before this?" Callahan asked. "Nursing," she said. "Before nursing." She looked up, then met his eyes. His expression wasn't aggressive or accusatory. It was the expression of someone doing a calculation. "I went to school," she said. "Then I worked in a trauma unit in Harlan County. Then I came here, Harlan County," he repeated. "Yes, small hospital. Pretty far from anywhere. That's why I liked it," she said, and clicked out of the chart. "Your orthopedic consult is this afternoon. Do you need anything for pain before then?" He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Stryker. The dog was looking at her. "No," Callahan said, "I'm fine." Victor Hale had been the administrative operations director at Calloway Veterans Medical Center for 11 years, which was long enough to know exactly where the power sat in every room and how to position himself closest to it. He was the kind of man who scheduled meetings to establish dominance rather than accomplish things, who read personnel files with the interest of a man collecting leverage, and who had built a small empire of institutional control by being present at the right moments and absent during the wrong ones. He was also specifically the kind of man who resented competent women who didn't seek his approval. He had noticed Nora Voss, the way he noticed most things he didn't understand, with a suspicion that she was getting away with something. She had no connections at Calloway before she was hired. Her application had come through the standard portal, her references had checked out at 2 previous positions, and her credentials were valid. But she had been hired during a period when Hale was on administrative leave recovering from a minor surgery, and the director at the time had made the decision without consulting him. He had never forgiven either party for that oversight. Over the years he had looked for something to catch her on. Nothing significant had ever materialized, which he found more irritating than reassuring. People who did nothing wrong were either boring or hiding something. He had settled reluctantly on the assumption that she was boring. Until the dog incident. Word traveled fast in a hospital. By 10 in the morning, 3 different staff members had mentioned to different people that the new Ranger patient's service dog had done something unusual when the 3rd-floor nurse went in to assess him. Hale heard about it by 11, in the compressed, half-accurate way that hospital gossip always traveled, and by noon he had decided it was actionable. Pulled Nora's employment file. He read it the way he always read files, looking for gaps. The work history was thin in a way that could be explained by someone who moved around, which wasn't unusual in nursing. But there was a gap, 14 months between her documented position at a clinic in Moorhead and her start at the hospital in Harlan County. 14 months of nothing. No explanation, no gap notation, no reference that covered that period. He brought it to HR by 2 in the afternoon. The HR manager, a cautious woman named Sandra Briggs, looked at the file and said, "It could be anything. Career break, family situation, travel. We didn't require explanation for gaps when she was hired. We require honest and complete employment history," Hale said. "There's no documentation that she falsified anything. A gap isn't falsification. An unexplained gap in a file that suddenly has a military dog reacting to her is worth looking into." Sandra looked at him with the expression of someone choosing their battles. "I'll send a request for clarification to her directly. I want her pulled from patient care while we investigate. Victor, that is not proportionate to..." She may have misrepresented her background. "We have an obligation to our patients." The conversation went 3 more rounds before Sandra agreed to send a formal inquiry to Nora, which was not a suspension, but which Hale described to 2 nursing supervisors as essentially that. By 4 o'clock, the 3rd-floor charge nurse had told Nora that administration wanted to speak with her about her employment records and that she should come to Hale's office at the end of her shift. Nora had been in the middle of a wound care procedure when Gale relayed the message. She had nodded, finished the procedure, documented it, and said nothing. But her hands had been very still for the rest of the afternoon. Hale's office was a corner room on the 2nd floor, with a window that looked out over the staff parking lot. He had decorated it with framed certificates and a photo of himself shaking hands with a state senator, and he had positioned his desk so that anyone sitting across from him was slightly lower, a setup so obvious that Nora had clocked it the moment she sat down. Sandra Briggs was there, which was protocol. She sat off to the side with a legal pad and the body language of someone who wished she was somewhere else. "Thank you for coming in," Hale said, which was not a thanks. It was a signal that he considered her time his to direct. "Of course," Nora said. "We've been reviewing your employment file." He opened a folder on his desk with the care of someone revealing a weapon. "There appears to be a gap in your work history. 14 months between your position at a clinic in Moorhead and your start at Harlan County Regional." "Yes," she said. He waited for more. She gave him none. "Could you explain what you were doing during that time?" She looked at him steadily. "I was dealing with a personal matter." "Can you be more specific?" "No." Sandra made a small noise that might have been the beginning of an interjection. "Ms. Voss," Hale said, "with the particular patience of a man who enjoyed this part, we have an obligation to verify the backgrounds of our clinical staff. If you're unable to account for a significant period in your employment history, we have to consider what that means for your standing here." "I haven't falsified anything," she said. "A gap in employment isn't a lie. It's an omission. In a section of the application that asked me to list positions held, I listed the positions I held, the spirit of the requirement. I'm familiar with the form," she said, and there was something in the way she said it that made Hale pause, not because it was rude, but because it was completely without deference. "If you have documentation that I falsified my credentials or my clinical history, I'd like to see it. If you don't, then this conversation is about a gap in employment, which I've acknowledged and which I've declined to explain for personal reasons, which is my right." The room was quiet. Sandra Briggs wrote something on her legal pad. Hale leaned forward. There was also an incident this morning. Patient in room 14. I assessed a patient, Nora said. Patient has a service animal. The service animal was present. The animal reacted to you in a way staff described as unusual. Dogs are unpredictable. Not trained military working dogs, he said. They're actually very predictable, which means when they deviate from their pattern, it's meaningful. She said nothing. I'm going to recommend a temporary reassignment while HR reviews your file, he said. Effective tomorrow. You'll be moved to administrative support pending resolution. Administrative support, she repeated. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Not angry, something else. The look of a person making a decision. And if I decline, then I'll recommend your suspension pending investigation. Pause. Sandra had stopped writing. Fine, Nora said, and stood up. Administrative support. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and looked back, not at Hale, but at Sandra. Make sure you document this conversation accurately, she said. All of it. Then she left. She was in the parking garage by 6:15, sitting in her car with the engine off. The sun was going down behind the parking structure across the street, cutting orange light through the concrete gaps at an angle that made the whole space look slightly unreal. She had her hands on the wheel, and she was doing nothing with them. Years. She had spent 6 years not drawing attention, not surfacing, not giving anyone a reason to look too closely. She had chosen Calloway for its size and its institutional stability. She had built something careful and functional here, not a life exactly, but a workable version of one. She knew the names of her patients' grandchildren. She knew which attendings took shortcuts and which ones genuinely read the chart. She had learned to like the gas station coffee, and now a dog had ruined it. Not the dog's fault. She knew that. Stryker had recognized her the same way she had recognized him through something baked in below conscious thought, the particular grammar of people who had trained together in spaces most people would never see. She had worked with a Malinois named Hector for 11 months, during an assignment that still didn't officially exist. She hadn't thought about that assignment in years. She had gotten very good at not thinking about it. She took her hands off the wheel and pressed them flat against her thighs. Question now was containment. Hale was fishing. He didn't know what he was looking for, which meant he hadn't found anything yet. The gap in her employment history was real, but it was also unverifiable. People who could confirm what she had done during those 14 months were either cleared above his level or bound by agreements that would never surface in an HR investigation at a regional veterans hospital. She could write it out. Take the administrative reassignment. Let him look. Give him nothing to find. He would lose interest eventually. Men like Hale always did when they couldn't get the satisfaction of a specific accusation. She was still telling herself this when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it for 3 rings. She picked up. Still driving that old Civic? A voice said. A woman's voice, low and unhurried. Nora's throat tightened. Who is this? It's been a long time, the voice said. I know. But we have a problem, Nora. And your problem is going to get bigger before it gets smaller. I don't know who your... Captain Callahan was not in that convoy by accident, the voice said. And Stryker didn't find you by accident either. Someone sent them. Parking garage was very quiet. I need 48 hours, the voice continued. Don't do anything stupid. Don't run. And for the love of everything, don't let Hale get into your sealed file. I don't have a sealed... She stopped. You do, the woman said. You've had one for 6 years. You just didn't know it was there. Listen to me. Stay at Calloway. Go to work tomorrow. And whatever you do, do not tell Callahan anything. The line went dead. Nora sat in the parking garage for a long time after that, watching the light shift from orange to gray through the concrete gaps, her hands flat and still on her thighs. When she finally started the engine, it was full dark outside, and the hospital behind her was lit up floor by floor, the way all hospitals looked at night, like something that never quite slept, something that was always waiting for the next thing to go wrong. Pulled out of the garage and drove home. She did not sleep. The next morning she reported to administrative support, which turned out to be a closet-sized room on the 2nd floor, where someone had put a desk, a computer, and a filing tray that hadn't been touched in approximately 2 years. The task assigned to her was digitizing patient comment forms from the previous quarter, a job so removed from clinical work that it felt like a rebuke expressed in paper. She sat down, logged in, and started scanning. She was good at waiting. She had been trained to be. At 10:15, she heard raised voices in the hallway, the particular register of voices that meant something clinical, not administrative. Stood at the door and listened. One of the 3rd-floor nurses, a man named Tobias, came around the corner at a half-run and saw her. There's a situation upstairs, he said. She was already moving. What kind? One of the convoy patients from yesterday, the one with the service dog, his vitals are going sideways. The on-call doc is stuck in a procedure. Secondary team is 5 minutes out. She hit the stairwell at a pace that was not quite running. What's the presentation? BP dropping, he's diaphoretic, restless. He was fine at 8. Could be a bleed. She pushed through the third-floor door. 2 nurses were at Callahan's room. She went straight in. Callahan was conscious but wrong, the gray undertone in a face that had been ruddy yesterday, the way his breathing had changed to something shallow and compensatory. Stryker was standing at the foot of the bed, rigid, watching her. She moved to the vital signs panel, checked the numbers, looked at the wound on his arm. When did the dressing last get changed? She asked. This morning. By who? A pause. I did it, one of the nurses said. Per protocol. She looked at the arm. The dressing was clean, but the arm beneath it was wrong, slightly swollen, the color extending further than it should. She put 2 fingers gently at the edge of the field dressing and pressed. Callahan hissed. Compartment pressure, she said. Call the surgical resident right now. Tell them possible compartment syndrome developing in the left forearm. We need a pressure check immediately. She was reaching for the IV line, checking the rate, the bag. Who ordered this fluid rate? Attending from last night. Needs to go up. Can someone get me the attending on call? She was talking without looking up, moving between the vital signs monitor and the IV pole, and the patient with the economy of someone who had done this in smaller spaces, in worse conditions, without any of the equipment she currently had access to. Dex, she said, using his name for the first time. I need you to stay with me. Can you do that? He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, the fog of dropping blood pressure, but also something sharper underneath it. Yeah, he said. I'm here, good. Tell me if the pain changes in your hand or fingers. It's already, he stopped. Fingers. Okay. She straightened and spoke to the room. This needs surgical in the next 20 minutes, or we're looking at permanent damage. Everyone clear on their job? The nurses moved. The call went out. Stayed. She was still at the bedside when the surgical resident arrived at a controlled run. 8 minutes later, a young man named Pratt, who looked like he'd been interrupted, doing something important, and was recalibrating, took one look at the situation and did not argue about who had identified it. Good catch, he said to her, pulling gloves on. The dressing change this morning may have missed early signs, she said neutrally, which was about as diplomatic as she could be while being accurate. Pratt moved to the bed. Stryker watched the whole sequence with the focused stillness of an animal that had learned to identify which humans in a room were actually in charge. At one point, his gaze moved from Pratt to Nora and stayed there. Callahan noticed. You knew what it was before I checked, he said, while Pratt prepped for the pressure reading. I had a differential, she said. No, he said. His voice was quiet and specific, the voice of a man who had spent his life evaluating accuracy. You walked in here and you knew. She didn't answer. He watched her the way he'd watched her the day before, with the calculation of someone running an intelligence assessment, not a conversation. Where did you train? He asked. I told you. Nursing school then. Not nursing, he said, before that. Pratt glanced up from his kit. Nora picked up the tablet and entered a note. Her hands were steady. I'm going to step out and let the surgical team work, she said. Someone from the floor will be back in 15 minutes to check on you. She left before he could say anything else. In the corridor, she stood against the wall for 3 seconds. 3. Then she straightened and went back to her assigned closet on the second floor, sat down at the desk, and picked up the next paper comment form. Her hands were still steady, but inside her chest, something was shifting, a pressure building, the way pressure always built before something broke open. She had managed one day. She did not know how many more she had before the thing she had hidden for 6 years surfaced the rest of the way. And the quiet, careful life she had constructed here came apart at every seam she had ever sewn. Comment form in her hand was from a patient who had written, in large, careful letters. The nurse who helped me never told me her name, but she stayed until I wasn't scared anymore. Nora looked at it for a long time. Then she put it in the scanner and moved on to the next one. 2 in the afternoon, Victor Hale walked into the administrative support room, without knocking. She had been expecting him. I've made some inquiries, he said, settling into the chair across from the desk, with the satisfaction of a man who had found something he was looking for, about your employment history, specifically the gap. Okay, she said. The Moorhead Clinic you listed as your previous employer before the gap. I spoke with their HR director this morning. They confirmed your employment dates. But the reference you submitted from that position? The person you listed is no longer reachable. Contact information is no longer valid. The email bounces and the phone number has been disconnected. She met his eyes. People change jobs and phone numbers. Yes, they do. He opened a folder he'd carried in. I also ran a standard public records check, which we should have done more thoroughly at Hire. There's very little trace of you before your position in Harlan County. No property records, no published professional credentials, no conference registrations, or professional association memberships. Nothing. For most people, there's a footprint. You have almost none. I'm a private person. You're an absence, he said, and there was something almost satisfied in his voice, the tone of a man who had decided what the answer was, and was now building the question around it. And I want you to know that I've escalated this to the hospital director, Dr. Pauline Ash. She's authorized me to place you on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a full review. Nora looked at him. Your keycard access to patient areas will be suspended as of right now, he continued. You'll need to surrender your badge to security on your way out. HR will be in contact within 48 hours about the next steps. Does Sandra Briggs know about this decision? Sandra is HR manager. I am administrative operations director. This is within my authority. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. I'd like that documented. It will be. And I'd like a copy of whatever records you pulled. You'll receive what you're entitled to. She looked at him with the same steady absence of deference she had shown the day before, and he held her gaze with the confidence of a man who believed he had just won something, turned and walked to the door. She stopped. Victor, she said without turning around. Ms. Voss. Whatever you think you found, it's only the surface. She paused. And surfaces are designed to be found. She walked out before he could respond. She was in the elevator when her phone buzzed. A text from the same unknown number as the night before. 3 words only, it's starting. Tonight, the elevator doors opened on the lobby. Outside, through the glass front of the building, the afternoon sky had gone the heavy gray of a weather system rolling in. Wind was picking up across the parking lot, moving the flags at the hospital entrance in short, urgent bursts. She walked through the lobby toward the exit, badge in hand to surrender to security, and she did not look back at the 3rd floor. She did not let herself. She had learned a long time ago that looking back was how people got caught. She pushed through the front door into the cold air and walked straight ahead, the way she always had, the way she had been trained forward, controlled, without visible hesitation. Somewhere on the 3rd floor behind her, Stryker had left his post at the foot of Dex Callahan's bed and gone to stand at the window, and he was watching the parking lot below with the posture of an animal waiting for something specific, something he alone already knew was coming. The wind followed her home. It came off the ridge west of Durin in cold, uneven gusts that rattled the windows of her apartment and pushed dead leaves against the door in small, nervous clusters. She had lived in the same 2-bedroom unit for 4 years, top floor of a building that was neither nice nor terrible, chosen because it had 2 exits, a stairwell that emptied into an alley, and a landlord who didn't ask questions. She had never hung anything on the walls. She had a couch, a table, a bed, and enough kitchen equipment to feed herself without thinking too hard about it. The apartment looked exactly like what it was, a place someone was prepared to leave. She didn't pack a bag. That was important. Packing signaled panic, and panic made mistakes. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and thought through the geometry of her situation the way she had been taught to think through problems in the field, from the outside in, without attachment to the outcome she preferred. What Hale had found was real but incomplete. The gap in her records was a gap, not a door. There was nothing on the other side of it that he could access through standard channels. Her reference at the Moorhead Clinic was gone because the person who had created that reference was gone, which was by design. Public records absence, he had noticed, was also by design, the result of 6 years of deliberate low-profile living and, before that, something more intentional that she was not going to think about in detail right now. Problem was the sealed file. She had not known it existed until last night. The woman on the phone had said it plainly: you have one. You just didn't know it was there. And the statement had sat in Nora's chest like a splinter since then, working its way deeper with every hour. Sealed files meant someone had gone to the trouble of creating a formal record of her existence during the years she didn't officially exist. That required either a very good friend or a very specific kind of enemy. She didn't know which one had done it, and she didn't know what was in it. And not knowing those two things, one as the part, made her hands want to move when she was sitting still. She finished the water, rinsed the glass, put it on the drying rack. Then she went to the closet in the 2nd bedroom, pushed aside a box of winter clothes, and retrieved a flat, military-grade case from the floor. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. Inside was a phone she had not turned on in 3 years, A small notebook filled with a shorthand that would look like nonsense to anyone who didn't know the system, and a laminated identification card with a different name on it. She looked at the name for a long moment. It felt like reading someone else's mail. Put the card back in the case, closed it, and put it on the bed next to her. Then she picked up her regular phone and called the unknown number back. It rang twice. "I was wondering how long that would take," the woman said. "Tell me about the file," Nora said. A pause, not hesitation. More like the pause of someone deciding how much to unspool at once. "Your name is in a JAG-adjacent record from 6 years ago. It was filed by someone inside the oversight structure that ran your last operation. The record exists to document that you were extracted and relocated. It's basically a paper trail that proves you didn't disappear voluntarily. Who filed it? Someone who was trying to protect you." Another pause. "Someone who is now in a position to either help you or hurt you very badly, depending on how the next 48 hours go." Nora looked at the case on the bed. "Is Callahan part of this?" "He doesn't know he is," the woman said. "But the people who sent him to Calloway, they know about the file. They know what's in it. And they are currently very interested in whether Victor Hale is going to stumble into something he shouldn't find." "What does Hale have right now?" "Nothing actionable. He's made 3 calls today that concern me. One to a private research service, one to a former colleague at a Department of Defense contractor, and one stopped." "One what?" "One to a man named Garrett Fulsey." The name hit Nora like cold water, and she had to work to keep her voice level. "Fulsey is not someone Hale should know." "No," the woman agreed. "He's not." "How do they know each other?" "That's what I'm working on." "But Nora, Fulsey, knowing that someone is looking at your file changes things." "Fulsey, knowing your name changes things considerably." Stood up from the bed and walked to the window. The alley below was empty. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay visible. Go back to the hospital tomorrow. If they've suspended your badge access, challenge it through HR. Make noise. Make a formal request. Put your name on paper demanding due process. The more institutional record there is of Hale acting without proper authority, the better." "You want me to make myself a target?" "I want Hale to think he's winning," the woman said. "People who think they're winning get careless." Nora pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. "And Callahan?" "Dex Callahan is he's complicated. Presence there is real. His injuries are real. But someone arranged for him to be transported to Calloway specifically. Someone wanted Stryker in that building. To find me. Confirm you were there," the woman said. "Which is different." A long pause stretched between them. "Who are you?" Nora asked, though she had half an answer already forming at the edge of her mind. "Someone who was on the wrong side of the same operation you were," the woman said, "and who has been waiting 6 years for the right moment to fix it." The line went dead again. Nora stood at the window for a long time watching the alley. Nothing moved. She went back to the bed, picked up the case, and returned it to the closet behind the winter clothes. She set an alarm for 5:45. She lay down on top of the covers without changing clothes. She did not sleep, but she rested, which was something she had learned to do a long time ago, the practiced stillness of a person who understood the difference between what the body needed and what the mind was willing to give it. She was at the hospital by 7. She went to the security desk, asked for the supervisor, and formally requested documentation of the badge suspension. The supervisor, a heavy-set man named Greer, who had always been decent to her, looked uncomfortable and produced a form from the previous afternoon. Hale's signature was on it. Sandra Briggs was not a co-signatory. "I need a copy," Nora said. Greer made the copy. She thanked him and went to HR. Sandra Briggs was in her office, which was unusual for 7 in the morning, which meant Sandra had either come in early deliberately or hadn't gone home. She looked at Nora in the doorway with the expressions of a woman who had been waiting for something difficult to arrive. "Come in," she said. Nora sat across from her, put the copy of the suspension form on the desk, and said, "Victor Hale suspended my badge access without HR co-authorization. I'd like to file a formal grievance." Sandra looked at the form, then at Nora. "He told me it was handled. He handled it without you. I'm aware." Sandra picked up the form. She held it the way people held things they didn't want to be associated with. "Nora, I need to ask you something directly." "All right." "The gap in your employment history. I'm not asking for details. I'm asking if there's a reason I should be concerned." "Patient safety." "No," Nora said, "there isn't." Sandra held her gaze for a long time. She was not a naive person. She had been doing HR work in a hospital environment for 15 years, which meant she had developed a reasonably accurate instinct for when people were lying and when they were telling a partial truth that happened to be true enough. "Okay," she said, "I'll process the grievance. But Nora, I can't reinstate your patient care access unilaterally. That'll require Dr. Ash to weigh in. I understand. I want the process documented. That's all. She left HR and went back to the administrative support room because it was still technically her assigned location, and she was not going to give Hale the satisfaction of finding her somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. She sat at the desk and she waited, which was something she was good at. At 9:40, Tobias appeared in the doorway, the same nurse who had come to find her during the compartment syndrome situation the previous day. He was in scrubs, and he looked like he'd had a worse night than she had, which was saying something. You're not supposed to be up on the floor, he said. I'm not on the floor, she said. Right, he came in anyway and closed the door behind him, which was either brave or careless. She couldn't tell which. The thing yesterday. With Captain Callahan, the surgical team handled it well. You identified it. I was the first nurse in the room, Nora. He looked at her with the blunt exhaustion of someone who had decided to skip the diplomatic approach. His attending this morning said if you hadn't caught the pressure buildup when you did, he'd probably be looking at a fasciotomy and possible permanent nerve damage. That's the thing. She moved a comment form to the scanner. Glad it worked out. He didn't leave. Hale has been telling people you falsified your records. Hale doesn't know what I did or didn't falsify. I know that. There are people on the floor who... He stopped. Look, it matters what people think. You know that, right? When it comes to how this plays out. She looked at him. He was young, maybe 28, the kind of person who had gotten into nursing because he actually wanted to help people and hadn't yet had that quality ground down to a nub by the system. She felt something that might have been something like gratitude, which was an unfamiliar texture. I appreciate what you're trying to do, she said. Keep your name out of it. He nodded once and left. She went back to the comment forms. Garrett Fulsey arrived at Calloway Veterans Medical Center at 11:15 in the morning, and nobody on the third floor knew who he was. Came in civilian clothes, a gray jacket, dark slacks, shoes that were well made and recently polished, and he went directly to the administrative wing rather than to the clinical floors, which meant he had an appointment rather than a patient relationship. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, lean in the way that suggested he had once been very fit and maintained a functional version of that as an adult discipline. His face had the quality of a face that had learned to express exactly what was useful and nothing else. Nora didn't see him arrive. She found out about it 40 minutes later, when she went to the second-floor restroom and passed the administrative conference room, whose door was not fully latched. She heard Hale's voice, and then a voice she didn't recognize immediately, and then a phrase the oversight record that stopped her completely. Kept walking. She went into the restroom, ran cold water over her wrists, and stood at the sink for 30 seconds. Oversight record. That was not language Victor Hale would use on his own. That was specific terminology from a specific bureaucratic framework that had nothing to do with hospital administration. Whoever was in that room with him was not there because of her nursing credentials. They were there because of something else. She dried her hands and went back to her desk. At 12:30, her phone buzzed. A text from the unknown number. Fulsey is in the building. Don't react. Don't move. She hadn't moved. But the next text came 30 seconds later, and it was Threebs that reordered everything. He's going up. She looked at the message. Then she looked at the door. Third floor. Callahan. She was out of the room before she had made a conscious decision. She took the stairs instead of the elevator because the stairs were faster and because she needed the 30 seconds of movement to organize herself before she arrived somewhere she technically wasn't allowed to be. She pushed through the third-floor door and moved down the corridor at a pace that was urgent without being a run. Room 14's door was closed. She pushed it open. Callahan was sitting up in bed with his good arm, tablet in his lap. Stryker was at the foot of the bed. No one else was in the room. She stood in the doorway and looked at both of them, and something she had been holding in her chest since yesterday let go about 3 centimeters. Callahan looked at her, then at the door. You look like you ran here. I walked fast, she said. Your badge access is suspended. I'm aware. So you're not supposed to be on this floor. Also aware. She stepped fully into the room and let the door close behind her. Stryker had come to stand beside her. Same position as before, left shoulder, just behind. Put her hand on his head without thinking, and his tail moved once. A single slow wag. Callahan watched this. His expression was unreadable in a way that was different from his earlier unreadability-less assessment. More like someone managing a reaction they'd decided not to have yet. Someone came to see you, she said. Or they're about to. I've had a couple of visitors this morning. My CO called. Routine. This won't be routine, she said. Gray jacket. 50s. Very still face. He went very still himself. What do you know about that? I don't know anything, she said, which was technically true. I'm asking you to be careful, Nora. He said her name with a precision that suggested he had been thinking about how to use it. Sit down. I can't stay. Sit down, he said again. Not louder but differently, the tone of a man accustomed to being heard, but using it carefully rather than habitually. She sat in the chair that had been moved to give Stryker space. Callahan looked at her for a long moment. Stryker settled between them like a comma in a sentence neither of them had finished. I've been in this room for 2 days, he said. I've had time to think, and what I keep coming back to is the compartment syndrome. She waited. You walked into that room and you knew, he said. Told you that yesterday and you deflected it. But I've been going over it. You didn't do a standard nursing assessment. You went straight to the arm, you palpated in a specific you checked the distal circulation before you looked at anything else. It's not a nursing protocol. That's a trauma field assessment sequence. Combat medicine. She said nothing. Where were you trained? He asked, and it was the same question he'd asked before, but the texture of it was different now, not confrontational, not aggressive, almost careful. Dex, she said, and using his name cost her something she couldn't quite name. There's a man somewhere in this building right now who has access to a file I didn't know existed until 48 hours ago. I don't know what's in it. I don't know why it's here, or why now. But whatever's about to happen in this hospital is not about my nursing credentials. She leaned forward slightly. Be careful what you say to whoever comes through that door. That's all I'm asking. He studied her face. You knew Stryker's recognition signal. No, you responded to it. I watched you. Your whole body responded, and then you shut it down. It's not something you can fake. Dex, I'm not going to pretend I didn't see it, he said. So tell me how wrong I am. The door opened. The man who came in was wearing the gray jacket. His eyes went to Nora first, and something crossed his face, not surprise exactly, more like a calculation completing itself. Then he looked at Callahan. Captain, he said, Mr. Fulsey, Callahan said, and the fact that he knew the name without being told it landed in the room like a stone dropping into still water. Nora stood. Ms. Voss, Fulsey said, looking at her with an expression she couldn't categorize. I was hoping to find you here, actually. You know who I am, she said. I've known who you are for 6 years, he said. That's the problem we need to discuss. Stryker made a sound low, controlled, directed at Fulsey. Not aggression. A warning. Fulsey glanced at the dog and had the intelligence to stay where he was. Think, Fulsey said, looking between Nora and Callahan, that it's time to have a conversation that is several years overdue. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document. He set it on the end of the bed, closer to Nora than to Callahan. I filed that record 6 years ago, he said. I'm the one who sealed it. The room was very quiet. Nora looked at the document on the bed. She didn't pick it up. Why? She said. Because the operation that ended your career was not sanctioned, he said. And because 3 people died, because of decisions that were made above your level and blamed on you. His voice was flat and careful and entirely without the affect of someone delivering a performance. And because I was the person who signed off on those decisions. Callahan had gone very still in the bed. Stryker had not moved from his position. Nora looked at Fulsey's face for a long time at the specific quality of stillness in it, the kind that comes not from composure, but from years of carrying something heavy enough to change the way a person held themselves. You said there's a problem, she said. What kind? Kind that means the people I was protecting with that sealed file are now looking for it, he said. They sent someone to find you first. He looked at Callahan when he said it. Callahan's jaw tightened. Dex didn't know, Fulsey said. I want to be clear about that. He was told this was a welfare check on a former operative. He had no reason to question it. But Stryker found her, Callahan said, and his voice had an edge to it now. Which means someone knew she'd respond. Yes, Fulsey said. Which means someone other than you knows what she is. Yes. Fulsey's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted the weight of a man who had run out of ways to stand between a problem and its consequences. File was accessed 4 days ago, by someone with clearance they shouldn't have. And 2 days later, Victor Hale, a hospital administrator with absolutely no intelligence background, made a call to a number that traces back to an organization that should have no interest in a regional veterans hospital. Nora picked up the document from the bed. She unfolded it. The name on the record was not Nora Voss. It was a name she hadn't seen written down in 6 years, and reading it produced a sensation she didn't have a clean word for. Not nostalgia, not grief, something more structural. A load-bearing wall that had been hidden behind drywall for years, and someone had just knocked through to show her it was still there. She folded the document and put it in her jacket pocket. How long do we have? She asked. Folsey looked at his watch. There's a vehicle that left a location 40 miles north of here, approximately 3 hours ago, he said. Based on the call Hale made this morning, I believe he told them she was here and that her access had been restricted. He paused. They're not coming for the file. They already know what's in it. Then what are they coming for? Callahan asked. Folsey looked at Nora. She already knew. She had known from the moment he said 3 people died, because 3 people dying in a classified operation created 3 sets of questions that could never be answered in public without also answering questions about who had given the orders. And the people who gave the orders had spent 6 years making sure those questions stayed buried. She was the only person still alive who had been there, not the only witness. The only one who had kept quiet long enough to still be breathing. They're coming to make sure I stay quiet, she said. Folsey didn't confirm it. He didn't have to. Outside the room, down the corridor, a door opened somewhere. Normal sound. Normal hospital rhythm. Stryker turned his head toward it, and his ears went forward, and a low sound built at the back of his throat, not the warning sound from before. Something more precise, more operational. Callahan swung his legs off the bed. Don't, Nora said. I'm not lying in a hospital bed while you have a fractured radius and you were in early compartment syndrome 24 hours ago, she said. You are not getting off that bed. I've operated in worse condition. So have I, she said, and the specific weight of that sentence fell into the room and stayed there. He looked at her. She looked at him. Stryker had gone completely still beside her, ears fixed on the door, muscles coiled in the quiet, absolute readiness of an animal that had been trained for exactly this kind of moment. In the corridor outside, the footsteps had stopped, and the door handle moved. The handle turned 3 inches and stopped. Stryker didn't move. He held his position with the particular compression of an animal that had learned the difference between threats that announced themselves and threats that tried not to. His weight was forward. His breathing had gone shallow and deliberate, and his eyes were fixed on the gap between door and frame with the absolute concentration of something that had been built, over years, to read exactly this kind of moment. Nora had already moved. She was at the hinge side of the door before it opened, back flat to the wall. The position of someone who had done this in enough rooms, in enough countries, to have stopped thinking about it consciously. Her hands were empty. The room had a rolling IV stand, a chair with metal legs, a monitor cart. She had cataloged all of it in the first 20 seconds she was in the room, the way she cataloged every room she entered, because the habit was older than she was, and it didn't turn off. The door opened. Tobias stood in the frame. He looked at the room, at Callahan sitting rigid on the edge of the bed, at Folsey standing beside the window, Stryker locked and coiled at the foot of the bed, and then he looked at Nora flattened against the wall beside him, and his face went through approximately 4 distinct expressions in under a second. What, he said, is happening? Nora exhaled. One breath, controlled. Stepped away from the wall. What are you doing up here? Hale's looking for you, he said. He knows you're on the floor. Someone saw you come through the stairwell. He looked at Folsey. Who's this? Nobody you need to worry about, Folsey said. Tobias looked at Nora. He's got security coming up. She looked at Callahan. He was watching her with the focused attention of a man who had revised his estimate of the situation twice in the last 4 minutes and was still revising. She looked at Folse. Is the vehicle still 40 miles? She asked. As of an hour ago, he said. I don't have a current position. Then we have maybe 30 minutes. She turned to Tobias. I need you to go back downstairs. Don't tell anyone you found me. If Hale asks, you didn't find me, nor Tobias. She looked at him directly. I'm not asking you to lie for me. I'm asking you to take 30 minutes before you say anything. That's all. He looked at her for a long moment. Are you in danger? Question was direct enough that she gave it the answer it deserved. I don't know yet. Possibly. He nodded once, turned and left. She heard his footsteps going back toward the main corridor at a pace that was unhurried enough to be deliberate. She went to the window and looked down at the hospital's main entrance. The parking lot was ordinary staff vehicles, a few visitor cars, an ambulance bay with 1 unit sitting idle. Nothing that looked like a threat, which meant nothing yet. I need to know what's in the file, she said to Folse. I can tell you the relevant parts. Tell me all of it. Folse glanced at Callahan. Callahan said, whatever it is, say it. Folsey folded his hands in front of him, the gesture of a man organizing something he had carried in pieces for a long time. 6 years ago, you were part of an embedded medical support team for an operation in a region I won't name. The operation went wrong. 2 members of the team were killed in what was officially logged as an ambush. Third died of injuries that were attributed to the same incident. He paused. The official log was falsified. The ambush was a partial fabrication. Positioning of the team that night was the result of an intelligence failure that was reported internally, but buried before it could reach formal review. I know that, she said. I was there. What you don't know is who buried it. He met her eyes. There were 3 people with authority over that operation. One of them is dead. One of them is currently a senior figure in a federal oversight body. He paused again. And one of them is Victor Hale's former commanding officer. The room was very quiet. Callahan made a sound that was not quite a word. Hale served, Nora said. It wasn't a question, it was a piece fitting into a space she hadn't known was empty. 8 years, Folsey said. Intelligence support. He was never operational, but he had access, and he had relationships with people who were. When he left the service, he went into hospital administration, which is not a coincidence, given that Calloway has a federal contract and handles military patients. He looked at her steadily. Placed here, specifically, to manage situations exactly like the one you represent. I've been here for 6 years, she said. He didn't know you were here until recently. People he reports to didn't know either. You covered your tracks well. Folse's voice carried something that might have been genuine acknowledgement. But the file I sealed it was accessed 4 days ago by someone inside the oversight body I mentioned. That access triggered a notification, and the notification went somewhere it shouldn't have. To whoever is in that vehicle, Callahan said. Yes. Nora pressed her thumb against the edge of the windowsill. Paint there was chipped, had been chipped for years, probably, and nobody had gotten around to fixing it. Small details like that, the specific texture of neglect, were the things that made a place feel real. She had spent 6 years accumulating small real details like that. Chipped paint, gas station coffee, the name of Gail Moretti's youngest kid. What happens when they get here? She asked. If they find you without documentation of what I know, Folsey said, they have enough influence to have you detained under a provision that predates most modern oversight. It's rarely used, it's completely legal, and it would give them access to anything you know and remove you from any situation where you could speak to investigators. He said it plainly, without drama, which made it worse. Filed that sealed record to prevent exactly that. But if they've already accessed it, then they know what's in it. They know you exist. They know the record exists. They don't yet know what corroborating evidence I have. He reached into his jacket again, the other pocket this time, and produced a small drive. He set it on the bed beside Callahan. That does. Everything I've documented over 6 years. Testimony records, communication logs, the falsified after-action report alongside the original, and 3 witness statements from people who were present that night and survived. Where did you get those? She asked. I've been building this since the week after the operation, he said. Told you. I signed off on decisions that got people killed. I've been trying to figure out how to fix that ever since. He looked at the drive on the bed. Problem is that evidence alone isn't enough. It needs a witness who was there to contextualize it. Someone the oversight body can't dismiss or discredit. He looked at her. That's you. Nora looked at the drive, then out the window, then at Callahan, who was watching her, with an expression that had moved past assessment into something more direct, the look of a person who has decided to be honest about the fact that they're paying attention. So I have to come forward, she said. You have to be willing to, Folsey said, before they get here. If you go on record with me before they arrive, it changes the nature of what they can do. It moves this from a containment operation to a potential federal misconduct case. And if I do that, she said, 6 years of quiet go away. Yes. She turned back to the window. Behind her, Callahan said quietly. You've been running for 6 years. I've been living, she said. From something. She didn't answer. She was watching the parking lot entrance. A dark sedan had turned in from the road and was moving slowly through the lot, the specific slowness of a vehicle whose driver was looking for something. Folsey, she said. He was beside her in 3 steps. They both watched the sedan complete a slow loop and pull into a spot near the far end of the lot, away from the ambulance bay, facing out. The engine didn't turn off. Nobody got out. That's not them, Folsey said, but his voice had a fraction less certainty in it than before. No, she agreed, that's a spotter. She gave herself 45 seconds to think, which was more than she usually needed and less than she wanted. The hospital had 4 exits on the ground floor main entrance, ambulance bay, a service entrance at the rear, and an emergency egress on the east side that alarmed on opening. The stairwells fed into the main lobby and the service corridor. Elevators were monitored at the security desk. If someone wanted to watch exits while maintaining deniability, they would need at minimum 2 vehicles and a communication link to whoever was inside, which meant there was probably someone inside already. Turned from the window and looked at Folsey. Did you come alone? Pause that told her the answer before he said it. I have a contact in the building. She came in separately. The woman who called me, Nora said. Fulsay looked at her with a recalculated expression. Told me she hadn't made contact. She called me 2 nights ago, Nora said. And last night. She's the one who told me about the file. Fulse went very still. That's a problem, Callahan said from the bed. It's not a problem, Nora said, though she wasn't completely sure of that. It means she's been moving faster than you knew. She looked at Fulsay. Where is she now? She was supposed to be in the administrative wing, watching Hale. Get her on the phone. He already had his phone out. He dialed. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Jaw tightened, which was the most visible reaction she had seen from him, and it told her more than anything he had said in the last 20 minutes. Try again, she said. He did voicemail. She made a decision. The thing about decisions under pressure was that the pressure didn't actually help you think faster. That was a myth that got people killed. What pressure did was eliminate options until only one remained, and the skill was in reading which option that was before it became the only one. Callahan, she said, I need your phone. Why mine? Because mine is hospital registered and might be monitored. Yours is personal. He reached to the bedside table with his good arm and handed it over. She dialed a number from memory, a number she had not called in 6 years, but had kept in the same mental file. She kept the shorthand notebook and the other name on the laminated card. It rang twice. Voss, she said, when it picked up. She used the name deliberately, the old name, because the person on the other end would need to hear it. I need a federal contact, someone who can take a misconduct report in real time and timestamp it before I'm pulled. A pause on the other end. She didn't wait for a long response. I don't have time to explain the full situation. I have documentation, a witness with sealed records, and a potential illegal detention situation developing in the next. She looked at Fulsay. 20 minutes, he said quietly. 20 minutes, she said into the phone. Can you get me a name and a number in 5? The person on the other end said 3 words. She exhaled. Thank you, she said, and ended the call. She handed Callahan his phone back. He was looking at her the same way. Stryker was looking at her focused, still tracking. Fulse asked. Someone from before, she said. You're not the only person who spent 6 years building contingencies. For the first time since he'd walked into the room, Garrett Fulsay looked like something had shifted in his assessment of the situation. Not relief, something more complicated. The look of a man who has been carrying a weight and discovered that someone else had been carrying a portion of it without telling him. Call came back in 4 minutes. A name and a number texted to Callahan's phone. She read it once, memorized it, and dialed immediately. The line connected after 1 ring, which meant it was being monitored for inbound calls, which meant someone on the other end was already aware enough to be waiting. She identified herself by the old name again. She gave her current location, stated clearly, and in the specific language she had been trained to use for exactly this kind of situation, that she was requesting real-time documentation of the following testimony as a matter of federal record under the Military Whistleblower Protection Framework. She gave the date, the time, and the name of the hospital. Then she talked for 7 minutes. She was not emotional. She was precise. She gave dates, locations, unit designations without full classification markers, and the specific sequence of events on the night 3 people died in a situation that had been documented as one thing and was another. She described what she had seen, what she had been told, and what she had been ordered to keep silent about in the immediate aftermath. Described the source of that order. She named the name. When she was done, the person on the other end confirmed receipt and gave her a case reference number. She repeated it aloud so Fulsay could write it down. When she ended the call, the room was quiet for a moment. Callahan had both hands on his thighs, the posture of someone managing the urge to do something physical when the situation doesn't allow it. Stryker had moved to the door and was sitting with his back to the room facing outward, which was a posture she recognized as perimeter monitoring. The dog was listening to the corridor. It's not over, Fulsay said. No, she agreed. But it's on record. That changes what they can do. It doesn't change what they might try to do before they know it's on record. I know. She picked up the small drive from the bed and held it out to Callahan. I need you to hold this. I'm in a hospital bed. Makes you the last person they'd search first. She met his eyes. If something happens to me in the next hour, that drive gets to the case reference number I just read out. Can you do that? He looked at her for a long moment. His expression had moved through several things in the last hour and had settled into something she couldn't fully read, not quite anger, not quite admiration, something that sat between those 2 states and had its own specific weight. He took the drive and closed his good hand around it. Don't let something happen to you, he said. I'll do my best, she said, which was honest, which was the most she could offer. She was moving to the door when the alarm went off. Not a medical alarm, the overhead PA system, a code she recognized from the hospital's emergency protocol. Code Silver, workplace violence, active threat, shelter in place. The tone cycled twice through the PA, and then the intercom crackled, and a voice read the code designation with the controlled urgency of someone trained to stay calm while transmitting terrible information. Stryker was on his feet. Callahan was already off the bed, and she didn't argue with him this time, because there was no longer a version of the situation where him being in the bed made any difference. She opened the door. The third-floor corridor was in the early stage of a controlled emergency nurses, moving patients toward rooms, a charge nurse at the station reaching for the phone, two staff members she didn't recognize at the far end of the hall moving in the wrong direction, away from the nursing station, toward the restricted corridor that led to the medication room and the back stairwell. She watched those two people for 3 seconds. Their clothes were wrong. Not conspicuously wrong, they were wearing scrubs. The right color for clinical staff, but the way they moved in the scrubs was wrong. Cadence was wrong. People who worked in hospitals moved with a particular consciousness of space, of other bodies, of equipment. These two moved the way people moved when they were trying to approximate that consciousness without having it. "Fulsey," she said quietly, not turning around. He was behind her. "I see them. They're not staff, no. They're looking for the medication room," she said. "Because the medication room has a locked secondary exit that opens into the service corridor, which bypasses the main elevator monitoring," Fulsey said. "Which means there's a third person in the service corridor already." She stepped back into the room. Callahan had found his shoes and was sitting on the bed putting them on, one-handed, with the grim efficiency of a man who had done worse. Stryker was in the room watching the door. "Alternate exit," she said to Callahan. "I know this hospital," he said. "I've been here 2 days. I read the floor plan on the emergency card." She looked at him. "Habit," he said without apology. "There's a service access door at the east end of the corridor," she said. "Connects to the maintenance stairwell. It's not the emergency egress, it won't alarm." She looked at Fulsey. "Take him down. Get to the administrative wing." "Hale's office." "Hale's office," Fulsey repeated. "He's the link," she said. "Whatever documentation he pulled on me, the records requests, the phone calls, that's physical evidence of coordination. Doesn't leave the building with whoever those two are. And you? I'm going to make sure those two don't get to the medication room." "Nora." Callahan stood. He was slightly unsteady, blood pressure still low enough to matter. She could see it in the way he compensated, but he was standing. "You are not doing this alone. You have a broken arm, and you were in compartment syndrome yesterday. And you're one person against two people who are probably carrying things I don't want to think about you, encountering without backup." "I'm not engaging them," she said. "I'm redirecting them. There's a difference." "What kind of redirection?" She looked at Stryker. The dog was watching her with the ready attention of an animal waiting for a signal. She looked at Callahan. "Does he respond to non-Heller commands? Basic ones?" Callahan's expression shifted into something complicated. "Certain ones. If they come from someone he's accepted." "Has he accepted me?" A pause. "Ask him." She looked at Stryker and gave a hand signal, a flat palm at hip height, the universal hold command that predated any specific training program. Stryker sat immediately, square and still. Callahan was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "He's accepted you." She gave Stryker a second signal forward. "Search with the specific angle that meant track, not retrieve," and pointed toward the door. Stryker moved to the door and put his nose to the gap at the bottom, reading the corridor through it. "Fulse," she said. 30 seconds and then you move." Fulse nodded once. He put a hand briefly on Callahan's shoulder, the gesture of a man acknowledging something he owed, and positioned himself near the door. Nora took the IV stand from beside the bed. She collapsed it to its shortest configuration, a practical metal pole that was not a weapon unless it needed to be. She looked at Callahan one more time. "The case reference number," she said. "I have it," he said. "If you get separated from the drive." "I have the number," he said. "Go." She opened the door and moved into the corridor. 2 people in scrubs were at the far end of the hall, one of them running a keycard against the medication room lock. Hospital keycards had physical variance markers. Anyone who worked in the building long enough learned to recognize staff cards by the badge color and format. These cards were the right color, but she could see from 40 feet that the format was slightly off. The kind of nearly right that got produced when someone had access to a template, but not to the actual print run. Card wasn't working. The taller of the two, a man with the shoulders of someone who spent serious time in a weight room, looked up and saw her. She didn't run. Running was information. It told the person watching you where you thought the threat was and how much it scared you. She walked the way she always walked in the hospital, with the pace and direction of someone who had a task and was doing it. Medication rooms on bypass during a code silver, she said, as she got within 20 feet. Automated lock. You'd need the charge nurse to override it. The man looked at her. His partner, shorter woman, same wrong posture, had turned as well. Which unit are you from? Nora asked, in the same tone she used when asking a patient if they'd eaten. Neither of them answered. She kept walking. She was 10 feet away now, the IV stand at her side, and she could see clearly that both of them were tense in the specific way people got tense when their plan had encountered an unexpected variable and they hadn't decided yet how to categorize it. She had about 4 more seconds before they made a decision. Can get you the charge nurse, she said, still moving, angling toward the nursing station as though she was going to do exactly that. The woman moved first. She stepped into Nora's path. Not aggressively, it was a controlled, deliberate cutoff, designed to stop her forward movement without triggering a physical confrontation in a corridor with witnesses. We don't need the charge nurse, she said. Her voice was flat in a way that had been practiced. We just need to find the patient in room 14. Room 14 is back the other way, Nora said. He's not in his room. I can check at the station. It's okay, the woman said. We'll look ourselves. She moved to go around Nora. Nora stepped in the same direction. She stepped a slight, casual obstruction, the kind that could be attributed to a person misjudging personal space. The woman stopped. Behind her, Nora heard the door at the east end of the corridor open the maintenance access. She didn't look. She kept her eyes on the woman in front of her and counted internally, 1, 2, and then Stryker came through the door. The Malinois moved down the corridor at a working pace, not running, not charging, just moving with the focused velocity of an animal who had a job, and positioned himself between Nora and the 2 people in front of her. Stood there. He did not make a sound. He didn't have to. Tall man took a step backward. The woman went still. Military working dogs had a specific reputation among people who operated in environments where those dogs were deployed. The reputation was accurate. The man and woman in front of her were trying to calculate the odds, and the calculation was not going well for them. I'm going to find someone to help you locate the patient, Nora said, in exactly the tone she had used before, as though none of the last 30 seconds had happened. Wait here. She walked backward, 3 steps, keeping her eyes forward, and then turned and moved toward the nursing station at the same unhurried pace. Stryker fell in at her left shoulder. At the station, she picked up the desk phone and dialed security. Not because security was going to solve the immediate problem, but because the call would be logged, time-stamped, and it put everything in front of cameras. She reported 2 individuals on the 3rd floor who could not produce valid staff identification and had attempted to access a restricted area during a code silver. She was still on the phone when the 2 people in scrubs disappeared toward the stairwell. Put the phone down. Her hands were completely steady. She did not know whether Fulsey and Callahan had made it to Hale's office. She did not know what the 3rd person in the service corridor had done. She did not know if the sedan in the parking lot had moved. She had a case reference number, a drive in the hand of a one-armed Army Ranger, and a Belgian Malinois sitting at her left side, who had recognized her as something she had spent 6 years pretending not to be. She looked down at Stryker. Okay, she said quietly. Let's find them. She moved toward the maintenance stairwell door. Pushed through it. The stairwell was concrete and fluorescent, the kind of space that stripped every other sensory input down to footsteps and breathing. She heard both immediately, one set ascending from below, moving fast, and beneath that, from 2 or 3 floors down, a sound that was not footsteps. It was a voice. Sharp, single word. Then a crash that echoed up the shaft with a hollow amplification of concrete and steel, and then silence, the specific weighted silence of something having gone very wrong in a small space. Stryker launched down the stairs. Nora went after him. Below her, 2 floors down, a door was hanging open with the evidence of having been forced. The frame was cracked at the latch, the way doors cracked when someone hit them hard and fast rather than using the handle. She went through it. The service corridor was narrow, utility pipes running the ceiling, the smell of cleaning chemicals and something sharper underneath. The far end, Fulsey was against the wall. His jacket was torn at the shoulder, and there was blood on the side of his face from a cut above his ear, but he was upright, and his hands were moving, reaching into his jacket, reaching for something. Callahan was on the floor. She crossed the distance in 4 seconds. Callahan was on one knee, not down he'd caught himself, or been caught, and he was using the wall to push back upright. His face was the gray-white of someone who had used blood pressure they didn't have in reserve. His good hand was holding something against the wall for balance. The fractured arm was close to his chest. I'm fine, he said before she could speak. You're not fine, she said, already running her eyes over him. No new bleeding, no obvious head injury. The arm was okay. Orthostatic. She got under his good arm and took some of his weight without making a production of it. Where is he? Gone, Full said from the wall. He had the side of his face pressed to his forearm, managing the bleeding. Third one. I miscounted. I told you, she said. You told me, he confirmed. Did they get anything? No, I had the drive. He looked at Callahan. I didn't let go of it, Callahan said, voice rougher now. The corridor emergency light was the only illumination, casting everything in the flat yellow of a space designed for function. Somewhere above them, the code silver alert was still cycling through the PA. She could hear distantly the sound of multiple vehicles in the parking lot, more than before. Fultz, she said. I hear it. How many people did you contact before you came here? He hesitated. Fulce. Enough, he said, with the careful specificity of a man choosing his words very precisely. Contacted enough people that if something happened to me in this building, the documentation would reach the right places. And if something happened to me? He looked at her. Same answer. She processed this. So the people in the parking lot. Some of them are here for containment, he said, and some of them are here because I made calls. How do we tell which is which? He reached into his jacket, the same inside pocket, and produced a phone. Pulled up a message. He held it toward her. The message was from a number she didn't recognize, containing 3 letters. CLR. Clear, he said. The vehicle in the parking lot. The dark sedan that came in first, that's mine. She looked at him. I sent the spotter, he said, to confirm you were here before I came in. I needed to know the situation before I walked into it. He paused. Told you that earlier. She stared at him for a moment. Particular frustration of being managed by someone who meant well was its own specific texture. She filed it and moved. Can you walk? She asked Callahan. I've been walking. For the next 5 minutes, you need to walk like you mean it, she said, because we're going upstairs. And when we get to the 3rd floor, I need you to be someone who looks like a patient who went looking for a drink of water. Not someone who got knocked into a wall in a service corridor. He looked at her with an expression that was 90% composed and 10% something else. You're very specific. I've had to be, she said. She got him upright the rest of the way. He was heavier than he looked, which meant the muscle density was exactly what she'd estimated the first time she assessed him. She adjusted her grip. Stryker had positioned himself on Callahan's other side, filling in the space where a second person would normally stand. He was steady and deliberate, and he did not look like an animal, he looked like a colleague. She moved them toward the door. Behind her, Fulce said, Nora. She looked back. He was still against the wall, his face still bleeding, and he looked like a man who was about to say something he had been sitting on for a long time. I'm sorry, he said, for what it's worth at this point. I'm sorry it took me 6 years to fix what I broke. She looked at him for a long moment. There were things she could have said. She chose one. Help me get him upstairs, she said, and then you can be sorry. He pushed off the wall and came with them. They were halfway up the stairwell, Callahan, moving on his own now, one hand on the rail, Nora half a step behind when the stairwell door above them opened, and a woman came through. Small, dark-haired, wearing civilian clothes, and she was moving with the careful speed of someone who had been in too many stairwells to make noise in them. Stopped when she saw them. Nora stopped. They looked at each other. The woman's face was older than her voice had sounded on the phone. She had a cut on her hand, fresh, and she was holding her left arm slightly away from her body. Behind Nora, Fulce made a sound. Margot, he said. Garrett, the woman said, not looking at him. She was looking at Nora. She's exactly what you said she was, she told Fulce, still looking at Nora. 2 in scrubs are in custody. Hospital security held them. One of the others is still in the building. She looked at her phone. And the case number cleared 8 minutes ago. It's in the system. Nora let out a breath. It's in the system, Margot repeated, and now she looked at Fulce. Whatever they were going to do, they can't do it quietly anymore. Then we go back upstairs, Nora said. Yes, Margot said. Except. She stopped. Nora looked at her. The small hesitation in someone who had been moving without hesitation for the last however many minutes told her more than the word that had started before it stopped. Except what? She said. Margot looked at her phone again. Then at Nora. Victor Hale is not in his office, she said. Security checked 3 minutes ago. His car is still in the lot. Still in the building, Callahan said. Yes, Margot said. And he made a call 12 minutes ago. She turned the phone so Nora could see the transcript of an intercepted call. Short 4 lines, and the last line was a location. Room 14. Nora was already moving. She took the stairs 2 at a time. Stryker was ahead of her, moving with the fluid precision of an animal who had been given a direction and needed nothing else. Behind her, she could hear Margot keeping pace and Foot slightly behind that, his footfalls heavier than they should have been for a man who was trying to move quietly. Callahan she had told to stay in the stairwell, which he had not agreed to and which she had not waited to argue about. Third-floor door hit the wall when she came through it. Corridor was in the organized disruption of a code silver that was winding down. The overhead alert had cycled to standby, which meant security had cleared the primary threat and was transitioning to sweep protocol. 2 nurses were at the station. A security guard was at the far end of the hall with his back to her. The door to room 14 was closed. She covered the distance without running. Pushed the door open. Victor Hale was standing at the bedside. He had the table drawer open, and he was holding something, a small envelope, the kind used for patient valuables, already sealed. He looked up when the door opened, and his expression did the thing expressions do. When a plan encounters an obstacle it hadn't modeled, it went briefly, completely blank, before reassembling into something functional. Room 14 was empty of any patient. The bed was unmade, the foam wedge still on the mattress, the vital signs monitor still running its idle display. Stryker moved into the room and positioned himself 6 feet from Hale and sat, which was more disciplined than aggressive, and somehow more threatening for it. "Ms. Voss," Hale said. His voice had the careful steadiness of a man performing steadiness. "You're not authorized to be on this floor." "Put the envelope down," she said. "This is hospital property. Patient valuables left in. Victor." She said his name the way she had said it in the administrative office 2 days ago, flat and without the performance of deference. "Put it down." He looked at the envelope in his hand. Something moved across his face, a calculation, or the end of one. He set the envelope on the bedside table. Margot came through the door behind Nora. She had her phone out and she held it up, briefly recording or transmitting, or both. Hale saw it. His jaw tightened. "Whatever you think you're doing," he started. "The envelope," Margot said. "What's in it?" "Patient property." "I just told her." "This room's patient is in the service stairwell," Nora said, "with a documented fractured radius and orthostatic hypotension. The room has been empty for at least 20 minutes. So what you're holding is not patient property you were securing." Hale looked at her. The blankness had been replaced by something harder and more honest, the expression of a man who has been outmaneuvered and is deciding whether to admit it or keep moving forward through sheer institutional authority. He chose the second option, which she had expected. Men like Hale almost always did. "I'm going to need both of you to leave this room," he said. "I'm calling security." "Security is already aware of the situation on this floor," Margot said. "They're aware of 2 individuals in clinical staff clothing who were unable to produce valid identification. They're aware of a forced door in the service corridor. And as of about 4 minutes ago, they're aware that you are not in your office despite your car being in the lot." She lowered the phone. "You want to call them? Go ahead." Hale didn't reach for his phone. The envelope was sitting on the bedside table between them. It was standard hospital issue, the kind with a clasp closure, roughly the size of something that might hold a patient's watch or ring. It was also, Nora could see now, slightly thicker than a single item would make it. Picked it up. "That's not yours," Hale said sharply. She opened the clasp. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small object wrapped in tissue, a USB drive. The same kind of drive Fulsey had given Callahan in the stairwell, but this one was labeled in permanent marker, with a designation she didn't recognize. She looked at Hale. "Where did you get this?" He said nothing. She looked at the label again. It was a file code. The format was specific, institutional, the kind used in intelligence-adjacent record systems. She had seen that format before 6 years ago, in documents she was not supposed to have seen at all. "This is from the oversight record," she said. Not a question. Hale's silence had a quality to it now, dense and deliberate, the silence of a man who had made a legal calculation. "You had a copy," she said. "All this time." She set the drive on the table and looked at him with the specific, unadorned attention of someone fitting a last piece into a structure they've been building for years. "You weren't placed here to manage situations like me. You were placed here to protect this, to make sure it never surfaced." "I want a lawyer," Hale said. "That's your right," Margot said. "And you can have one. But right now there are federal investigators in the building. They came in through the main entrance about 6 minutes ago. While you were up here, and what you do in the next 30 seconds is going to matter considerably for how the next conversation goes." Hale looked at the door, then at Nora, then at the drive on the table. She had spent 2 days watching him perform authority, the folder on the desk, the positioned chair, the careful architecture of a man who built his power from other people's uncertainty. Watching him recalculate without those tools available was an entirely different thing. He looked smaller. Not because she was diminishing him, because the performance had stopped, and what was underneath it was just a man in his mid-50s who had made decisions he couldn't unmake and had been maintaining them for a long time at a cost that was now coming due. She did not feel satisfaction about it. She wasn't sure what she felt. Something complicated and tired and real. "Sit down, Victor," she said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended, almost gentle. "Done." He sat. The federal investigators were 2 women and a man, all in civilian clothes, all carrying credentials from an oversight body whose full name Nora had known for 6 years and had hoped never to see in person. They came to the 3rd floor in a way that was not dramatic, no raised voices, no visible hardware, no production. They simply arrived the way institutions arrived when they finally moved, with the quiet, unhurried weight of something that had been building for a long time and had finally decided to land. The lead investigator was a woman named Reyes, compact and direct, who introduced herself to Nora with a handshake and the specific look of someone who had read a file thoroughly before arriving. "We have your testimony on record," she said. "The case number is active. Everything that happens from here is documented in real time." "The drive," Nora said and handed it to her. Reyes looked at the label. Something shifted in her face, not surprise, more like confirmation. "We'll need the original documentation from Mr. Voss as well." "He's in the stairwell," Nora said. Reyes looked at her for a moment. "Stairwell. It's been a complicated morning. What happened in the next 2 hours happened in pieces, the way these things always did, not a single revelation, but a series of smaller ones, each one adjusting the shape of the last." Nora spent most of it in the hospital's administrative conference room, the same room she had walked past earlier when she'd overheard Hale and Foltzy, now occupied by investigators and a hospital administrator, who had been called in on her day off and arrived looking like someone who wished she had stayed home. Dr. Pauline Ash was the hospital director, a tall woman in her 60s, with the particular composure of someone who had run a large institution long enough to have survived several kinds of crises. She sat at the head of the table with a legal pad in front of her and listened to the outline that Reyes provided with the focused attention of a person taking in information they needed to respond to rather than information they were hearing for the first time. Nora sat to one side, not at the table, in a chair that put her slightly outside the formal arrangement of the room. She had asked to be there as a witness and observer, not a participant, because the participants were the investigators and the documentation and the institutional machinery that needed to process what Hale had done. Part was recorded. Her name was in the system. She did not need to perform anything else right now. Callahan was in the room too, which was not ideal from a medical standpoint, and which she had stopped arguing about approximately 40 minutes ago. He was sitting in a chair across from her with Stryker at his feet, his fractured arm in its sling, his face, the controlled color of someone managing pain through discipline rather than medication, because he had refused the additional pain management she had suggested twice. He was watching the room the way watch everything systematically, tracking the important elements, filing the rest. Caught her looking at him. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. Folsey sat across the table from Reyes, with the posture of a man who had spent the last 6 years preparing for this specific conversation and was experiencing the particular exhaustion of something finally happening. He had a folded cloth pressed to the cut above his ear. Someone had offered him medical attention, and he had declined it in the same way Callahan had declined the pain management, which told her something about the kind of people who ended up in situations like this one. Margzo sat beside him. She had not told Nora her last name, and Nora had not asked, because there would be time for that later, and right now it was enough to know which side of the table she was sitting on. The drive Hale had been holding when Nora came through the door turned out to contain something none of them had fully anticipated, a parallel record. Not the sealed file Folsey had created, but a separate documentation assembled by Hale over the years, a record of his own management of the situation, written from his perspective, justifying each decision in the language of operational security and institutional protection. It was, in a way, a confession that didn't know it was a confession. Reyes read through it at the table while the room was quiet, her face doing nothing visible, and then she set it down and said to the other investigators, "Flag sections 4 through 9 for the review board." Nora looked at her hands. 6 years ago she had written her own account of the operation, not formally, not at any system, but in a notebook in the shorthand that was now sitting in a case in her second bedroom. She had written it because she needed somewhere to put what had happened, and she had chosen that particular form because it was the most unreadable version of the truth she could construct. She had told herself at the time that she was being careful. Now, sitting in this room, she thought that she had also been scared. That the notebook was as much about keeping the thing at a distance as it was about preservation. She was still thinking about this when Hale was brought in. He came with 2 security officers and a lawyer who had arrived in the last 40 minutes, a man who moved with the specific briskness of someone billing by the hour. Hale sat at the table in the chair that had been left for him, which was not at the head, and was not beside anyone who was there by choice. He looked at Nora when he sat down. She looked back. Whatever he saw in her expression, it wasn't what he'd been looking for. Tell by the way he looked away first. Reyes opened the formal portion of the interview by reading Hale his rights under the relevant federal statutes, which was not a short process. During it, Hale's lawyer leaned over twice to say something quiet, and Hale nodded both times. When Reyes finished, Hale said, with the precision of a man who had been coached, "I'll be providing a full account in cooperation with this investigation." Nora looked at her hands again. Cooperation. The word people used when the alternative had closed. She left the conference room at 2 in the afternoon. She went to the 3rd floor because it was where she went when she needed something familiar, even if familiar was complicated right now. Code Silver had officially cleared. The floor was back to its standard operational rhythm: patients in rooms, nurses doing assessments, the particular ambient sound of monitors and movement, and the low-grade managed urgency that was the background noise of hospital life. Gail Moretti was at the nursing station. She looked at Nora when she came through the door, and then looked quickly away, which told Nora something about how information had been moving through the building today. She didn't stop at the station. She went to the small family waiting area at the end of the corridor. 4 chairs, a table with old magazines, a window that faced the side parking lot, and sat down. She was there for maybe 5 minutes before Callahan came in. He had Stryker with him, which meant he had walked the length of the corridor with a broken arm and orthostatic blood pressure issues, which she chose not to comment on because the alternative was an argument she was too tired to have. He sat in the chair beside her, not across from her beside her, with a foot of space between them, which was close enough to be deliberate and far enough to not be a statement. Stryker put his chin on her knee. She looked down at the dog. He looked up at her. "You okay?" Callahan asked. "I don't know yet," she said, which was the most honest answer she had given anyone in a long time. "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, 2 vehicles she didn't recognize were in the side lot investigator vehicles, probably. "Reyes wants a formal statement from me too, about the convoy, about being sent to Calloway." "What are you going to tell her?" "The truth," he said, "which is that my CO told me this transport was routine and my instinct said it wasn't, and by the time I figured out why, a nurse I'd known for 2 days had already sorted most of it out." She looked at him. "I was used," he said, without particular drama. "So was Stryker. Someone knew his training profile and knew your background and put us in the same building because they needed confirmation you were still here. I don't love that." He paused. "But the people who did it aren't the same people who ordered the operation 6 years ago. Distinction that matters. Does it?" He looked at her directly. "I've been in operations where the people sending me had bad information. Operations where they had good information and made bad choices. They're different problems." She considered this. It was the kind of thinking she had done professionally for years and had mostly stopped doing when she stopped being the person who did it professionally. Felt strange to do it again, not wrong, just unfamiliar, like wearing old clothes that still fit. "What happens to you now?" she asked. "Medical leave. Then probably a review board, given that I was transported on a questionable order." He flexed the fingers of his right hand, the good one. "After that, I don't know. The arm needs hardware. Recovery is a few months." A pause. "Stryker gets a break either way. He's overdue. He doesn't act like he wants a break. He never does. That's the problem." Callahan looked at the dog. Something passing through his expression that was between pride and worry. The particular combination people wore for things they loved that were also capable of getting hurt. "What about you?" She looked out the window. The vehicles in the side lot. The flags at the main entrance, still moving in the same cold, uneven wind from this morning. "I don't know," she said again. "That's 2 I don't knows in 5 minutes. Been a 2 I don't knows kind of day." Something that might have been a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. "Before today, the 6 years here." Was he stopped? Started again. "Was it what you needed it to be?" She thought about the question honestly, which took longer than it should have. "Parts of it," she said finally. "I was good at the work. I liked the work." She looked at the door to the corridor. "I was also hiding. And I don't think those 2 things are as separate as I wanted them to be." He nodded slowly. Not the nod of agreement, the nod of someone receiving information carefully. She was about to say something else when the door opened and Margot came in. She looked at both of them with the expression of someone delivering information she wasn't sure was welcome. Reyes needs you, she said to Nora. Both of you, actually. There's a development. What kind? Callahan asked. Margot held her phone out. On the screen was a message short internal format, the kind Nora recognized from the investigative framework she'd been in contact with this morning. She read it once. The name in the message was not Hales. It was the name Folsay had mentioned in room 14, the senior figure in the federal oversight body. The one who had helped bury what happened 6 years ago. The one Nora had named in her testimony this morning. The message said he had resigned his position 45 minutes ago, and that his resignation letter had been accompanied by a personal statement that named 3 other individuals and described in specific detail a pattern of operational misconduct going back nearly a decade. Nora read it twice. Then she handed the phone back to Margot. He broke, Callahan said. He wasn't asking. People do, Nora said. When the math stops working. She stood. Stryker stood with her, his movement mirroring hers in the automatic way of an animal that had decided. She looked at Callahan. Can you walk back down there? Yes, he said, in the tone of a man who was going to walk back down there regardless of the answer. They went out into the corridor. Gail Moretti was still at the nursing station. This time she didn't look away. She met Nora's eyes, a brief, direct, complicated look that contained something like an apology without being shaped enough to be one. Nora gave her a small nod and kept moving. They were passing the nurse's station when Sandra Briggs appeared from the elevator. Sandra, who had been in HR for 15 years, who had looked at Nora's employment file and said, I need to ask you something directly, and then listened to the answer. Stopped when she saw Nora. She had a folder in her hand and the expression of someone who had been walking with purpose and had just needed to revise it. I heard, Sandra said. Most of it. She looked at the folder. Then at Nora. I reinstated your badge access at noon. I should have done it this morning. She paused. I should have done it yesterday. You were working with the information you had, Nora said. I was working with the authority I had and not the authority I should have used. She extended the folder. Your grievance is formally resolved, and Dr. Ash wants to speak with you when the investigators are done. Another pause, smaller. She said to tell you specifically that she would like to speak with you. Required to. Nora took the folder. I'll find her. They kept walking. At the elevator, waiting for the car to arrive, Callahan said without looking at her. Sandra Briggs did that in front of 3 nurses. I noticed. Word travels fast in a hospital. I know. Just observing, he said. The elevator arrived. They got in. Pressed the 2nd floor. The doors closed, and for a few seconds it was just the 2 of them and Stryker in a small moving box. The hum of the cable, the faint antiseptic smell that lived in every elevator in every hospital she had ever been in. Fulce's statement, Callahan said. The things he said about the operation. About what happened to your team. Yes. I need you to know, he stopped. Started again, more carefully. I've run operations with people who got left behind by bad decisions at levels above them. Not the same situation. But I know what it costs. To carry that without anyone acknowledging it. She looked at the elevator doors. I'm not trying to fix anything, he said. Wanted to say, I know that was real. What happened to you? It was real, and it mattered. And the people who said otherwise were wrong. The elevator stopped. The doors opened on the 2nd floor. She stood there for a moment, not moving, looking at the corridor through the open doors. Stryker was pressed lightly against her left leg. She could feel his warmth through her scrubs. Thank you, she said. Not because it fixed anything. Because it was true, and he had said it, and that was something. She walked out of the elevator. The 2nd formal session with the investigators ran 90 minutes. Nora gave her account again, this time in more structured format, with Reyes directing the sequence and a 2nd investigator capturing the record. Folsay was present for portions of it and absent for others, depending on what the investigators needed to keep sequenced correctly. Callahan gave his account separately in the adjacent room, which she could hear the low frequency of through the wall. When it was done, Reyes walked her to the door of the conference room and stopped her with a hand on the frame, not blocking, just pausing. Oversight body is going to initiate a formal review, Reyes said. The resignation this afternoon, combined with the documentation you and Folsay provided, is enough to open the full investigation. That means your name is going to be part of a federal record. I know. It means people will know who you are, what you were. I know that too. Reyes studied her. She was a direct person who had learned to read faces the way Nora had learned to read rooms quickly, practically, without sentimentality. How long have you been carrying this? 6 years, Nora said. Before that, a pause. Since the night it happened. Reyes nodded slowly. There's a support framework for personnel in your situation. Former classified roles, force relocation. It's not perfect. Nothing is, Nora said. No, Reyes almost smiled. Nothing is. But it exists, and we'll make sure you have the information. She removed her hand from the doorframe. One more thing. The individual who accessed the sealed file 4 days ago, the access that started all of this. Yes, it wasn't from the oversight body, Ray said. It was from outside the institutional framework entirely. Someone has accessed the file through a legacy database connection that should have been closed years ago. Nora went very still. Who? Reyes held her gaze. Someone who wanted this to surface, she said. Someone who had been waiting for the right moment and decided this was it. Fulsey didn't do it, Nora said. He'd have told me. No, Reyes said. Fulsey didn't do it. She paused. The access log traces to a terminal in a public records facility 2 states from here. The session lasted 11 minutes. The user pulled the file, made a copy, and sent it to a contact inside the oversight body who Reyes' team had already been watching. She paused again. The username on that session was not a real name. But the access code it used was registered 6 years ago to a person who was listed as deceased in the operational aftermath reports. Nora's chest tightened. One of the 3 people who died that night, she said. That's what the record says, Reyes confirmed. Which means either someone falsified a death record 6 years ago, or someone has been using a dead person's credentials for reasons we haven't established yet. Corridor was very quiet. I'm telling you this, Reyes said, because you should know that whoever opened the door to all of this, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. Someone chose this moment, chose this hospital, and chose you. She met Nora's eyes. We don't know yet who that someone is. Down the corridor, the door to the adjacent interview room opened, and Callahan came out, Stryker beside him, both of them moving with the controlled fatigue of a long afternoon. He looked at Nora's face and stopped. What happened, he said. She looked at him, then at Reyes, then back at the corridor, the ordinary, fluorescent-lit length of it, the unremarkable institutional space where everything had shifted today in ways that were going to take a long time to fully understand. Someone let us find each other, she said, and we don't know who. Callahan was quiet for a moment. Stryker looked between them with the alert patience of an animal waiting for the next thing he was needed for. Someone who knew both of us, Callahan said slowly. Someone who knew your background and mine, who knew Stryker's training profile well enough to use it as a recognition mechanism. He paused. Someone who had access to classified operational records from 6 years ago and the technical ability to pull a sealed file through a legacy system. She met his eyes. Someone, he said, who should be dead. Overhead fluorescence hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor beeped its steady, uninflected beat. The winds outside had picked up again, pressing against the building with the restless persistence of something that didn't know how to stop. Nora reached into her jacket pocket. She took out the document Fulsey had given her in room 14, the sealed record with her real name on it. She unfolded it. She looked at the section she hadn't fully read in the room, the lower portion she had folded over when she put it away. The bottom of the document, beneath the filing information and Fulsey's signature, was a secondary notation she had missed the first time. 4 words and a date. The date was 5 days ago. The 4 words were, "She's ready. Start it." And the signature beneath them was not Fulsey's. She read the 4 words again. "She's ready. Start it." The signature beneath them was small and slightly uneven, the way handwriting got when a person wrote carefully, rather than fluently, the deliberate hand of someone who had not written by hand in a long time. She knew the name. She had known it for 11 years. She had believed it belonged to a dead person for 6 of them. Reyes was watching her face. "You recognize it," Reyes said. Nora's voice came out level. She had no idea how. Her name was Petra Vane. She was the 3rd medic on our team that night. She folded the document along its original creases. Her hands were doing the folding without her full attention, working on the muscle memory of keeping something intact. The report said she died of her injuries 2 days after the operation. Internal hemorrhage. I never saw a body, she stopped. I was already gone by then. They relocated me the morning after. Which means you never had confirmation, Callahan said, standing very still. No, she said, I assumed. All assumed. Reyes took the document from her carefully. Terminal access. The credentials, the way this was constructed it, took time and specific knowledge. Months at minimum. Possibly longer. She looked at the signature. If Petra Vane is alive, she's been building this for a long time. She sent Callahan to find me, Nora said. She sent Stryker, Callahan said quietly. She knew his training profile because she'd seen dogs like him in the field. She knew Nora would respond to the recognition signal because they trained from the same framework. He looked at the document. She knew all of it, and she wanted it to surface, Nora said. The whole thing. She accessed the sealed file to trigger the notification, knowing it would move the people who had been containing the story, knowing that movement would create evidence of coordination. She looked at Reyes. She used herself as the accelerant. She exposed her own survival to set this in motion. She took a significant risk, Ray said. She'd already been dead for 6 years, Nora said. What did she have to lose? The corridor was quiet. Somewhere in the building, the ordinary machinery of a hospital kept running monitors, PA system, the sound of a cart moving somewhere below them. Life going on in the way life did, indifferent to the specific human wreckage being sorted through 20 feet away. Reyes folded the document into an evidence sleeve. We're going to need to find her, I know, Nora said. Do you have any idea where she'd be? She thought about it honestly. She thought about what she knew of Petra Vane, compact, fast, dark-humored in the way people got when they did difficult work in difficult places. She had been a better field medic than Nora in some respects, and worse in others. She had been afraid of almost nothing except administrative incompetence, which she considered the most dangerous force in any operational environment. She had once fixed a sucking chest wound with materials she pulled from a vehicle dashboard and argued afterward that the technique should be standard training. She'd be somewhere she could watch, Nora said. She's been watching this whole time. She wouldn't set something in motion and then leave. Reyes looked at her for a moment. Then she turned to the second investigator and said 3 words Nora didn't catch, and the second investigator moved away down the corridor with his phone already out. Well, look, Reyes said to Nora specifically. Go get some air. You've been in this building for 9 hours. Nora looked at her. Not a dismissal, Reyes said. That's a practical observation. You're not going anywhere. We can't find you. Take an hour. She went to the roof. The hospital had a rooftop access used primarily by engineering, reached through a maintenance door on the 5th floor that required a key she had borrowed from a hook in the supply room 3 years ago and had never gotten around to returning. The roof itself was a flat expanse of ventilation units and cable housings, and on the south end, a low concrete barrier that looked out over the western edge of Durin, the part of the city that sloped away from the hill the hospital sat on toward the river, which was narrow here and brown in the fall. She sat on the concrete barrier and looked at the city. The wind was colder up here. She had her jacket, and she pulled it tighter, and she sat with her feet hanging over nothing and thought about Petra Vane alive. Somewhere, having spent 6 years building a mechanism to tell the truth about a night that had ended 3 careers and 2 lives and at least one version of Nora's self. She thought about what it cost to do that. Not the logistics of it, the patience, the solitude, the years of maintaining a fiction of your own death, while also building something that required the kind of concentration that didn't leave room for much else. She knew what that cost. She had paid a smaller version of it, just by staying quiet and staying small in a city that didn't know her real name. Petra had done something harder. She had stayed invisible and simultaneously constructed a machine. She had trusted that when it ran, the right person would be in the right place to let it run. She had trusted Nora. That was the part that sat in her chest with the most weight. 6 years of no contact, no indication that Petra was alive, no signal, and then 5 days ago, a sealed file accessed through a dead woman's credentials, and 4 words written at the bottom of a document. She's ready. Start it. Petra had been watching. Long enough and closely enough to believe that the quiet nurse in the 3rd-floor step-down unit at Calloway Veterans Medical Center was still the person who had run toward the worst moment of both their lives, instead of away from it. Nora looked at the river. She heard the door behind her open. She didn't turn around immediately. She gave it a few seconds, waiting for the footstep pattern to tell her who it was. Light, quick, confident. Not Callahan, he moved differently, and his footsteps right now would have the compensatory rhythm of someone managing a bad arm and borderline blood pressure. Not Reyes. Not Fulci. She turned. Petra Vane was thinner than she had been 11 years ago, and her hair was different, and she was wearing a jacket that was too large for her, which had always been a habit because she ran cold and hated admitting it. She had stopped 6 feet away, and she was standing with her hands visible, which was the specific habit of someone who had spent years making sure they were not perceived as a threat in unexpected situations. She looked at Nora. Nora looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. The wind moved between them. You cut your hair, Petra said finally. Her voice was exactly the same. You died, Nora said. I didn't do it on purpose. A pause. I did, but not the way they said. Nora stared at her. They told me internal hemorrhage. I know what they told you. Petra came 2 steps closer and stopped again. She was doing the same thing Nora was doing, reading the distance, assessing, doing it automatically, because neither of them had ever fully stopped being people who did that. bad enough that they thought I was going to die. When it became clear I wasn't, it was more useful for certain people to have me dead than to have me talking. So they faked it. They facilitated my disappearance and updated the record. I had two choices: disappear the way they wanted me to, or disappear a different way. She looked at Nora steadily. Chose the different way for 6 years. Yes. Alone. Petra's expression shifted, not quite cracking, but moving. Mostly. There were a few people who helped at different points. Careful about who. Nora looked at her for a long time. There were 11 years between them, and 6 of those years had included the specific grief of believing someone you served with was dead, which was a grief that didn't operate on a normal schedule and didn't respond to the standard interventions and had a way of surfacing at 3 in the morning when you least had the resources to handle it. She was feeling a version of that grief right now, not because Petra was gone, but because she hadn't been, which was its own complicated thing to process. Why now? Nora asked. Why not a year ago? Why not 3 years ago? Because 3 years ago I didn't have enough. Petra reached into her jacket and produced a drive smaller than Fulci's, unmarked. And 1 year ago I didn't have this. She held it out. Communication records from the 48 hours before the operation. The ones that were supposed to be destroyed. They document who gave the final positioning order and who knew the intelligence was compromised before they sent us in. Nora looked at the drive. She didn't take it yet. I've been waiting for the file situation to stabilize, Petra said. Waiting for Full to finish what I knew he was building. I found out about his documentation 2 years ago, through a contact I won't name. When he sealed your file 6 years ago, I knew he was going to try to fix it eventually. I just had to wait until his documentation was substantial enough that mine would close the remaining gaps. You coordinated with him. Indirectly, he doesn't know I'm alive. A pause. He didn't know until today, probably. He's downstairs. I know. Petra looked at the door behind her, then back at Nora. I came up here first because I needed to see you before I went into that building officially. Before the investigators have me and the whole thing becomes procedural. She met Nora's eyes. I needed to see that you were okay. Nora looked at her. The word okay was doing a lot of work in that sentence. It was carrying the weight of 6 years of separation and a shared night that neither of them had been able to talk to anyone else about. Not honestly. Not fully. Because the only people who understood it were the ones who had been there, and most of those people were either dead or bound by the same silence. I'm functional, Nora said. Petra almost smiled. That's you being okay. It's the best available version of it. Yeah. Petra looked at the drive in her hand. Take this. Give it to Reyes. The chain of custody is better if it comes from you. I'm technically a dead person until the investigators formally process my situation, and a dead person handing over evidence creates procedural headaches. Nora took the drive. You're going to have to go in there and explain everything. I know, it's going to take a long time. I know that, too. Petra looked at the city below them, at the Brown River and the slope of the western neighborhoods. I've been not existing for 6 years. I think I can handle a long debrief. Petra. Nora stopped. She looked at the woman who had been her colleague and her teammate, and a person she had grieved and was now standing 6 feet away on a hospital rooftop in the cold. Why did you write that at the bottom of the document? She's ready. She paused. How did you know? Petra was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, it was with the specific honesty of someone who has thought about a question for a long time and decided to answer it fully. Because you stayed, she said. You could have run a dozen times over 6 years. You had the training and the resources, and there were at least 2 moments when Hale was getting close enough that running would have been rational. She looked at Nora. But you built something here. You put your hands on people who needed it, and you showed up every shift, and you made yourself matter to this place, even when you were pretending to be invisible. She paused. That's not someone who's still hiding. That's someone who's ready to stop. Nora looked at the river for a long time. Come on, she said finally. Let's go downstairs. What happened over the following weeks happened. The way significant institutional consequences always happen not in a single dramatic moment, but in a sequence of smaller definitive ones, each one building on the last until the shape of the outcome was unmistakable. Victor Hale was formally suspended from his position at Calloway Veterans Medical Center. The same afternoon, the federal investigators completed their preliminary review. The hospital board convened an emergency session within 48 hours. At the end of the week, his termination was official. His federal contractor clearance was revoked pending criminal review, and the 2 individuals who had entered the hospital in clinical clothing were held for questioning by federal authorities. Third individual from the service corridor was identified and detained through the work of Reyes's team within 4 days. The senior figure whose resignation had arrived in Margot's message, a man named Roland Deitch, whose name had appeared in Petra's communication records with devastating clarity, faced a federal misconduct review that was made public within 2 weeks of his resignation. His statement, the one that had named 3 other individuals, became the foundation of a larger investigation that the oversight body opened formally and announced without euphemism. The announcement used plain language. A classified operation had been mismanaged. The consequences had been deliberately concealed, and the people responsible had been protected by institutional relationships that had since been severed. Nora read the announcement twice. The second time, she was sitting at the kitchen table of her apartment with a cup of actual coffee, not the gas station kind. The kind she made herself when she had time, which she rarely allowed herself. She read it and set her phone down and sat with it for a while. Hale's public fall was not clean. Nothing like that ever was. Came out in pieces the original investigative report, the hospital board's public statement, the HR documentation that Sandra Briggs had been quietly and meticulously building for 2 years before any of this happened. Because Sandra Briggs was the kind of person who kept records precisely because she understood that authority without accountability was a particular type of hazard. What those records showed was a pattern that predated Nora Hale's habit of targeting staff he couldn't control, using administrative process as a personal enforcement mechanism, cultivating relationships with contractors in ways that blurred institutional lines. Nora was the most visible example of the pattern, but she was not the only one. 3 other former staff members came forward in the month following the investigation. Their accounts were different in specifics and identical in structure. The picture that emerged was of a man who had built a small, meticulous empire of intimidation and had hidden it inside the normal noise of institutional management for long enough that the people above him had stopped looking. The picture was public. The consequences were documented. The thing Nora had lived under for 2 years at Calloway, the specific weight of being managed by someone who had decided she was a problem before he understood what she was had a name now, and that name was in federal records, and Victor Hale was answering for it in rooms she was no longer required to be in. She was not going to describe this as justice, because justice was a word that implied a clean accounting, and this was not clean. People had died and years had passed, and Petra had lost 6 years to a fiction of her own death, and Nora had lost a version of herself she was still figuring out how to reclaim. The reckoning was real, and it was ongoing, and it was not going to restore anything that had been taken. But it was something. It was the thing being named and the people responsible being held to the consequence of their choices. That was what was available, and she had learned a long time ago to distinguish between what was available and what was deserved, without confusing the two. Petra's formal reemergence took longer to process. The investigators spent 12 days with her in a secure location before the situation was stabilized enough for the relevant agencies to acknowledge her existence. When they did, it was in the form of a formal correction to the operational record, 3 lines in a document that most people would never see, stating that the death record filed 6 years ago was inaccurate and that the individual in question was alive and cooperating with an ongoing federal review. 3 lines for 6 years. That was the institutional version of it. The human version was different and would take longer, and Petra was handling it with the same grim, dark-humored practicality. She had always applied to situations that exceeded normal coping frameworks. They talked on the phone twice a week, sometimes more. It was not a smooth process. There were stretches of silence in those calls that lasted longer than comfortable, and moments where one of them said something that landed wrong and had to be unpacked, and a conversation about the night of the operation itself that lasted 2 hours and left both of them exhausted and somehow lighter than before. It was the specific work of 2 people who had carried the same thing separately for too long, and were now, with difficulty and imperfect language, beginning to carry it together. Callahan's situation resolved differently. The review board that examined his transport order found that the order had been processed through a channel that had been compromised by the same network Petra had been monitoring. He was cleared of any procedural violation. His medical leave continued through the arm hardware surgery and the initial recovery, which was slower than he had hoped and faster than his surgical team had predicted, was apparently characteristic of him in a way that his medical chart had noted twice. He called her 6 days after the investigation closed its preliminary phase. She was in the hospital when he called, which was where she was most of the time now, and she stepped out into the hallway to take it. "How's the arm?" she asked. "Hardware's in. It's fine. Hurts in cold weather, which the surgeon said was normal, and which I find personally offensive. You live in a cold climate, I know. It's a problem." A pause. "Stryker wants to know when he's going to see you again." "Stryker have a phone?" "He's using mine. He's very resourceful." She leaned against the corridor wall. How is he actually? Good, he's on a reduced schedule while I'm recovering. He's not handling it gracefully. Callahan paused. Neither am I, honestly. She looked down the corridor at the nursing station, at the door to room 14, which had a new patient in it now. An older man who was recovering from a joint replacement and had a daughter who came every afternoon and sat with him for 2 hours reading out loud from a novel. What are you going to do when the medical leave ends? She asked. Depends on some things I'm still figuring out, he said. What about you? She had a meeting with Dr. Ash, scheduled for the following morning. Ash had asked to meet twice already, once immediately after the investigation, which Nora had attended, and once last week, which had been a different kind of conversation. Ash was a careful person who had made a mistake by proxy and was navigating how to address it without either minimizing it or performing an apology that was larger than it was authentic. Nora respected her for the navigation. It was harder than the performance would have been. The meeting tomorrow was about a proposal. Ash had been specific about that, a proposal, not an offer, because she wanted Nora to have something to evaluate, rather than something to accept or refuse as a package. I have a meeting tomorrow, Nora said. After that, I'll know more. Let me know. I will, a pause. Nora. Yes. For what it's worth, what you did in that hospital. The whole thing. Not just the corridor with the 2 people and the IV stand. I wasn't planning to hit anyone with it. I know. That's almost more impressive. His voice had shifted into something more direct. What you did matters, not as a story, as a fact. I wanted to say that plainly outside of a room full of investigators. She looked at the door to room 14, at the ordinary hallway, the chip paint on the wall across from her that had been chipped for as long as she could remember. I heard you, she said. Thank you. The meeting with Dr. Ash the next morning lasted 40 minutes. Ash had put together a proposal for a new trauma preparedness program, not the standard kind, not the compliance-driven module that hospitals ran twice a year with a PowerPoint and a sign-in sheet. A real one. Built around scenario training, field medicine integration, kind of interdisciplinary emergency response that civilian hospitals generally didn't have, because civilian hospitals generally didn't have people who knew what that looked like in practice. She wanted Nora to design it and lead it, not as a secondary role, as the primary one, with a formal title, a training budget, and the authority to pull nursing staff across units for simulation sessions without going through 3 layers of administrative approval. Nora sat across from Ash and listened to the whole proposal before she said anything. Ash was straightforward about it. She said plainly that she had learned something about her own institutional oversight failures during the past weeks, and that one of the specific failures was not looking harder at the people who were already in the building doing exceptional work without recognition. She said this without excessive self-flagellation, which Nora appreciated. Guilt that kept talking about itself was not useful. Guilt that changed what you did next was. I want to be direct about something, Nora said when Ash finished. Please. I'm not interested in this as a compensation for what happened. Take it, I'm taking it, because the work is worth doing. I'd expect nothing else, Ash said, and I'll need the authority to actually run it. Not advisory authority. Operational authority. That's what I'm offering. Nora looked out the window. The parking lot. The flags. The same view she had looked at from the conference room days ago, now containing different information. She thought about the patients on the 3rd floor. About the young nurses who didn't know what they didn't know yet. About Tobias, who had come to find her during the compartment syndrome situation, and who had the instincts of a good clinician that were still rough around the edges because nobody had put the right tools in his hands. About all the moments in all the hospitals where someone with the right knowledge would have changed an outcome, and didn't have it, not because they weren't capable, but because nobody had taught them in the right way. She thought about Petra, who had fixed a chest wound with dashboard materials and argued afterward that it should be standard training. She thought about Petra being right. Yes, she said. I'll do it. Ash nodded. She extended her hand across the desk. Welcome back, Nora. Nora shook it. The handshake was firm and brief and real. Thank you, she said. Not for the position. For the specific acknowledgement that she had been here before any of this, and that the here was where she belonged. Started the program 6 weeks later. The first session was in the hospital's simulation lab on the 2nd floor. 8 nurses, 2 residents, and 1 very skeptical attending physician who had been voluntold by his department head and arrived with the body language of someone serving a sentence. She had built the scenario herself, a multi-patient trauma situation with degraded resources and a communication breakdown. Kind of thing that happened in real emergencies and that standard training never prepared people for, because standard training was designed for ideal conditions that real emergencies specifically did not provide. She ran them through it once without stopping them. Afterward, she stood at the front of the room and looked at 8 people who had just experienced the specific humility of discovering that they were capable of better than their first attempt suggested. "Everything you just did wrong," she said, "can be corrected. What I just saw was not incompetence. It was the gap between what you know and what you haven't yet practiced." She looked at the attending physician, who had stopped looking like someone serving a sentence. "The gap closes. That's what we're here for." She ran them through it again. The second attempt was not perfect. Nothing was, but it was faster and cleaner, and 3 of the 8 made specific, visible corrections that changed the outcome of the scenario. She noted each one, not as praise but as data, which was more useful and more honest. For the second run, she gave them 15 minutes, and then they debriefed the whole session. Every decision that had been made and why and what the alternative would have been. Skeptical attending stayed 20 minutes past the scheduled end time asking questions. Stryker came to the first session with Callahan, who had come back to Durham 2 weeks after the medical leave officially ended and had not offered a comprehensive explanation for why, and Nora had not asked for one. Stryker sat at the back of the simulation lab and watched the scenarios with the alert interest of an animal, who recognized controlled chaos when he saw it. During the debrief, one of the nurses asked what his role was. "He's observing," Callahan said. "Does he do anything?" "He already did the important part," Callahan said, and looked at Nora, who looked back at him and said nothing, because nothing needed to be added to that. Later, after the room had cleared, she stood at the window of the simulation lab. Callahan was across the room, Stryker beside him, the 2 of them existing in the particular companionable quiet of people who didn't need to fill the space with language. Spent 6 years making herself small enough not to be seen. She had done it out of necessity, and she had done it out of fear, and she had done it out of something that had disguised itself as pragmatism, but had really been grief for the people who had died, for the person she had been, for the life that had been rerouted by decisions made above her without her consent. She understood all of that now with a clarity that 6 years of quiet living had not given her, and 3 weeks of everything coming apart had. The thing about hiding was that it cost the same, regardless of whether you were hiding from something real or from the fear of something that might happen. Cost was continuous and daily and shaped everything you did, including the good things, including the things you were proud of. Flavored the work. It sat in the background of every shift she had worked, and every patient she had helped, and every moment she had let herself believe she was just a nurse in a hospital who happened to be good at her job. She was more than that. She had always been more than that. The hiding had not changed it. What the hiding had done was make her the only person in the room who knew. That was over now. The room knew. The room was, in the complicated and imperfect way that institutions eventually acknowledged things they had gotten wrong, beginning to say so. She was not the quiet nurse that everyone overlooked anymore. She was also not a symbol or a story or the resolved ending of something difficult. She was a person, specifically this person, with this history and these hands and this particular knowledge of how to stay calm when someone's life was coming apart in front of her. That was what she had. That was what she brought. She was going to keep bringing it. Stryker padded across the room and sat beside her at the window. He didn't ask for anything. He was just there. Warm and solid and certain, in the way that only animals who have been trained to read humans could be fully present, fully attentive, not performing comfort, but simply providing it by existing in the same space. Put her hand on his head. Outside, the flags at the hospital entrance were moving in the cold air, and the city below the hill was beginning to show the first lights of early evening. And Calloway Veterans Medical Center was going about the ordinary, necessary business of keeping people alive. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because it had been given to her. Because she had stayed when leaving would have been easier. Because she had told the truth when silence would have been safer. And because she had never, not once, 6 years of pretending to be invisible, stopped being the kind of person who ran toward the thing that needed doing instead of away from it. That was the part no one could take. Not Hale. Not the people above him. Not the operation that had tried to erase her. Part that stayed, quiet and intact, underneath everything else. Still there. She had always known it was still there. Now everyone else did too.